let's set up the UI portion of our application. Now, on the surface, this should be a simple job. We're just configuring our application for GET commands to an API. That should mean a couple of text boxes, a few labels, and a button. However, there will be more to it. We'll also set up the basic UI code necessary to process the calls and responses. Now, this is lesson number 3 in our complete course on building a Postman clone. This course has been designed to be beginner-friendly and an example of what you might put in a portfolio. Although, don't just directly put this course in your portfolio. Your portfolio needs to be uniquely yours, not just a copy of someone else's work. If you want to go further in C#, I would encourage you to go to imtimcorey.com and check out the Dev Pass. Once you get the Dev Pass, I would recommend starting with a master course to get job ready and then fill in your gaps with one or more of the dozens of topic-specific courses included. The Dev Pass will get you up to speed and keep you up to date in your software development career. So let's jump into Visual Studio. And here we have where we left off last, which is our product is set up and ready to go. We just need to start dropping controls onto our form. So let's do that. I'm going to, for now, pin the toolbox. I pin and unpin the toolbox quite a bit because I don't like how much screen real estate it takes up. But at the same time, when you're working with a form, it's necessary. Also note that if you ever go to the code behind, notice the toolbox empties out. That's because the toolbox is specific to whatever thing is open currently, which is why it's only visible with the controls when you're on a form. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a header up here, and then we're going to have a probably a label on top, and then a text box right here. That will be what we enter in the URL. And then we're going to have a button over here that says, go or something like that. And then we'll have another text box down here that is our response, which can be a multi-line text box. I just dragging stuff on for now just to get something close. I'm also going to add one more thing under the menu and toolbars. I'm going to add a status strip. I want the strip down here to show up in order to give us some status about what's going on with the action. Okay, so that's the first setup. Let's actually make this look good. So first thing, for every control, and I did a bunch of it once, but for every control, I want you to make sure that you rename it first. So this is very important. If you ever create an event before you rename, well, then the event is getting named after the old name. So just make sure to change the name first. So we'll call this the form header. And we'll make this a lot larger. Let's go with 26. And then down here, we'll give it a name, and we'll say this is the Postman clone. Something like that, just to have a header on our form. We'll kind of position it like so. And then next, we're going to modify this label. And this label we will call the, the input, the API label. Sure. These won't be perfect. Then come down here to label, and we're going to call this the this API, like so, maybe colon afterwards. And then the question is, do we put this above our text box, or you put it in line like so? And I think we can put it in line because it's short enough. And then we can put our button here. And let's make our button the same size as the text box. And it says butt right now. That's great. Makes me giggle. Okay, so let's come to something like this. And we're going to say this button, well, first we haven't named the text box yet. So let's call this the API text. And this is going to be call API. And we'll say that this is maybe go. Sounds about right. And we can even shrink this down now to something like this, and then give ourselves more real estate for our URL. And maybe you should call this URL instead of API, but I think this is fine for now. And the question is, do we have another label here for results? I think we probably should. So let's drag in our label here, and we'll call this results label, and call this results. And some people have questions sometimes about why don't you call this, and this used to be a really popular thing with Windows Forms, to call this LBL results, like so. Why didn't you do that? Because that kind of tells you it's a label, and when you say results label, it's the same thing, right? Well, no, it's not. And the reason why, first of all, the LBL results is Hungarian notation. Microsoft used to push that. They used to say, hey, this is the way I do it. And now they're like, you know what? We made a mistake. That's not the way I do it. And part of it is, a big part of it is because of the fact that it makes your code less readable. It's not really human readable to see LBL because you're then translating in your mind, oh, that's label, and it's label results instead of, and that doesn't really compute either because it's backwards compared to what we'd say if we were discussing it. And so if we're discussing it, we say, hey, that's the results label. So when we name it, we can name it results label because when we say that's a results label, that makes sense. So it reads like we would talk, which means that when we're reading through code, it is more understandable, more relatable to see results label, and it's easier to read in your brain, which means that you're able to process the code faster and understand it more easily without having to stop and think about it. So that's why kind of that Hungarian notation has gone by the wayside, and why we instead use this type of naming convention. Okay, so right now we're not winning any awards for pretty, but we've got something going. And the other thing is we need to change this text box. I almost forgot. So we're going to call this the results window. Or results, yeah, results text is fine. Results text, result window. It's kind of up to you how you do it. We do want to come down here where it says multi-line and change this to true. If you double click on a property, it will, if it's a true and false, it will change. Okay, now you can kind of drag this down and let's resize our form a bit. This is where Windows Forms isn't the best, and that's because Windows Forms is kind of like a fixed positioning. So if we look in our, if we go over here to our designer code, which is the code that's generated for us, so you don't change this code kind of thing. But if you look in here, we'll see there's the location, there's the size. These are all fixed values. And this is where Microsoft tried to replace WinForms with WPF and XAML in general, because XAML is allowed to, it's more fluid and flexible. So you can say things like, hey, I want you to grow as the page grows and shrink as the page shrinks. And WinForms is not natively able to do that. Now, yes, there are things you can do to make it work that way. There are tools you can use or plugins. There's even doing it manually by hand, you can make this work, but it's a lot more complicated and something that, again, out of the box doesn't really happen. So with that, let's look to make sure that, we have the status strip. We need to rename status strip. So I'm actually had to check to make sure you don't have any controls that are improperly named. Just a minute. So let's call a status strip. And okay, so now we have a status strip. We don't have any controls in it yet. We're going to do that in just a minute. But if you do this drop down here, this drop down shows you every control on your form. So with it, you can either select something. So if I want to select the results text, I can click here. And now the results text is selected, and here's all the properties for it. But I can also look through this list and look for label 1, text box 1, form 1, and so on, because that would show me, oh, there's something in here that has not been renamed yet. So, for example, if I select a status strip and then come up here to my little icon here, let's zoom in here, is this icon right here. There's a drop down. You drop it down, and I want to have a status label, which added a new child element to my status strip. And I'm going to call this my results. Well, actually, let's call this system status. That makes more sense, I think. System status, and let's change this font size. Yes, this did not inherit from the form. So you have to come up here, and we're going to choose, let's choose 16. Usually, it's either 14 or 16. Let's look at 16, what it looks like. Come down here, and let's change this to be ready. And see if that's too big, or if that's, I think that's fine. Sometimes your status strip has smaller font sizes than the rest of your form does. Notice how like the font size for Postman clone by Tim Corey at the top here is small compared to the rest of the form. Sometimes your status is 2, and you might want to think about, well, maybe I, instead of 16, look for a 14 and make it a little smaller. So we'll leave it at 14. But the point here is this control is going to tell the user what's going on. And if you notice, we've got down here in the lower left-hand corner, let's get my cursor here, right here, it says ready, because that's what Visual Studio does. And we're going to do something similar, a similar pattern. So we're going to have it's ready, and then we'll change it to loading, we'll change it to there's an error, or give the user any type of other feedback that might be relevant to them. So that can kind of helpful for us to make sure the user knows things are going on. We could put progress bars or spinners or other things. I think this is going to be simple and clear, and that's all we're going to need to do for now. So with that, we have our, let's just verify again. We'll do this drop down, and yes, everything has been renamed. So now what we can do is we can create an event for this go method or go button, and make sure that we have at least some code in here. So double click on it and unpin toolbox and go to Solution Explorer. We can even shrink this down a bit. But in here is where, the namespace. Let's change that. There we go. File scope namespace. Now we have less indent. But in here, in this call API _click, this method is going to fire when you click the go button. Okay, so when you call the API, that's what's happening. All right. Notice that it's called call API _click because it takes it from the name of the button, which just so happens to be call API. So if you would name this button 1, well, then your event would be called button 1 _click, and that's not very descriptive. Now, what I want to do is I want to put some UI-specific code in this click event. This is very important that you think through, because the temptation is going to be to put all of your code in this section right here, and that's not right. Because when you do that, then you're tied directly to your user interface, and you can't change it out later. You're kind of locked in with Windows Forms. And if you ever decide, hey, I want to upgrade to WPF or Blazor or something else, well, if all your code is tied directly to your code behind, that's what this is, the code behind. Well, if all your code is tied here, then it's really hard to move somewhere else. That's why we're not going to do that in this course. What we're going to do is we're only going to do UI code in our UI. And that's important to separate out what is UI code and what's not. Because the other thing you don't want to do is you don't want to move UI code to your class library. Otherwise, your class library is tied directly to your user interface, and then you can't use that class library anywhere else, which means that you have no purpose for having a class library. It should all just be in the UI project. So with that, what we're going to do is when the user clicks this button, the Go button, we want to run a method that will call out to the API and get back the JSON value. Well, that's all code we can do in the library. However, there's some code we need to do here. So let's start with a try catch, because we don't know. We might have an exception from that API. Maybe you make a bad call and it's a an invalid URL or something like that. Well, then we want to tell the user something. And so what we're going to do is actually use the results window. So where it says results text, we're going to say results text dot text. And for right now, we'll just say an error colon space, and then the message. Now, this might leak too much information. If you don't want to leak that much information about why the error occurred, then you might just put a more generic error. But I think that that we're going to be just fine giving the message of the error, not the full error, because that would have the complete stack trace. We don't want to show it to the user necessarily. Now, maybe you do. Maybe you want to show the full stack trace because you don't fully trust the user or whatever. But for us, I think just the error message is fine. And then what we're going to do is we're going to change. No, that's not the right suggestion. We're going to change this ready button right here, which is system status. We're going to say system status.text equals error. Okay. And up here, we're going to say is system status.text equals calling API. I think that makes sense. And then we do want at the end to say system status.text equals ready, which might not make sense at first, but when we make the call and it works, it's going to put the information in the results window. So we're back to being ready for the next call. So that's why we go back to ready. But right now, this is going to happen right away. So let's do this. We're going to make an asynchronous call in between these two lines. We're going to make a call to our class library saying, hey, here's the API. Go ahead and make this call. So to do that, what we're going to do is, first of all, mark our method as async. And yes, since this is an event, we are saying async void. This is one of the only times that you would have an async void. Normally you have an async task. Async voids are a bad thing usually, but in the case of an event, this is one of the exceptions for when you have an async void. So in here, just for right now, we're going to say await task.delay, and we'll say, make it 2,000 seconds. So, and we'll just mark this here, sample code replace with the actual API call. Okay, so now we have something that would actually work in just the UI format. And notice, this is all UI code. How do you know it's UI code? Well, we're talking directly to the UI elements. So that's why we know that this is UI code, because we shouldn't ever know about the UI elements if we're not in the UI. So this is all going to run when we want to make a call to the API. Now, let's just try it out and see if it works. Okay, wait for it to load. Here we go. And we don't have to put anything in our API right now. We can hit go. And notice it says calling our API down here, and it says ready. So I do it again, and I'll zoom in here. Oops, let's try it again. Right there. It says calling API. So once it's done, it goes back to ready. So that kind of tells the user, hey, this is what's going on. That way, if there's a long call, they know something is happening. Now, there is something else we have not done yet, and that is validate our data. One of the things you want to make sure you do is never trust the user, because if the user can do something wrong, they probably will. So what could they do to this form that would be incorrect? Well, for one, this text box here, I believe this is still editable. So if we come in here, we can type. Yeah, that's not great for being able to see results. And we could hit go without any API code here. So what we need to do is we need to do some sort of validation, validate the API URL, and also we need to make sure that this is read-only. Okay, so this window is not, you cannot be changed. So that takes care of the text box, but the code over here to validate the API URL, well, guess what? We're going to push that off into the class library. And why would we do that? Because validating data is part of the UI's job, right? Well, not always, no. Because think of this from this perspective. Whenever you're looking at your code and saying, hey, is this UI logic or is it logic that can be pushed off into a class library? What you want to do is think through, if I replaced my user interface with a different one, would that code still work? So would the code still work to validate the URL if we change to Blazor, let's say? Well, yeah, we'd still want to verify the URL, and the code we use really shouldn't depend on which controls we have, or have the ability to have WinForms or something like that. It's not dependent on WinForms. It's dependent on just doing some code to check an API. So what we're going to do is put that in the class library and call it in this spot. That way, we can reuse that logic later when we change out the UI, if we do. Okay, so right now, our code behind is pretty set, and our UI seems to work. In fact, let's just run this and make sure we can't type in there. Yep, I'm typing, but nothing's happening. Okay, so we're getting close, but there's a few things I want to tweak. First of all, what if the results are bigger than this window? Well, I want to add scroll bars. So notice here I've selected the results window, and there's scroll bars, and you can select horizontal, vertical, or both. I'm going to choose both, which puts for right now just a vertical scroll bar, but then if you have content that does go to the right, then it will add the horizontal scroll bar. That way, if we have a large JSON output, we can see it all because the font size is much larger. Therefore, it's going to be quite a bit. Might have to even shrink the font down a bit. But either way, we could scroll through and see it all. So we want to make sure we have the ability to do that. That's one of the things that, if we're not careful, WinForms can bite us with, is when we can't get to something. For example, if I were to shrink down this form, well, that's not great because I can't get to my button and I can't see the bottom of my results window. So I can't even scroll because the scroll bars are both going to be gone. So we want to make sure that we can see everything, and we don't want to have a case where we're kind of locked into something. So that's why we want to make sure we add scroll bars where it's important or necessary. Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and change this battleship gray color. I don't like this color for the background. So let's select the form itself and then go to background color right here. Right now it's set to control, which if we do a drop down here, there are some options here, but we can also, and I know my font size is so small that it's hard to see anything, we can go to custom. And under custom, we can just choose white. Okay, and that gives us a white background. I think it's a cleaner look. We can look at these, like the background of this probably should be white too. So background color, custom, white, but then we should also probably have a border on this, border style fixed 3D or fixed single. Let's just look at what this looks like. I think fixed single might be better for us. So let's choose that. Let's choose that for this as well. The fixed single border. Okay, and that way we kind of have a clean look here. It's a little simpler. Let's make our button is a little small. I'm wondering if we should. It's the same size as our text box, but I'm wondering if we should make it a little bigger, or just leave it. For right now, let's leave it. I might put an icon there instead next time, or have an icon and go. But let's leave it for now. Don't get too caught up in making things pretty, but make things good enough, right? In our background for our status strip, do we leave that the gray? Let's run this and just see what it looks like. I don't love the gray. I think that's a little weird. So let's change it. There we go. And background color. It says the background color is white. I don't think that's white. So I'm going to click off of it and click back on. Let's change it by specifically selecting it, and just see if that makes a difference. And run it again. And it doesn't look great. It does match the top here. So the question is, do I fight on it or not? My guess is that if we were to look in the designer and look for that, let's see, where is it? API text, call API, results, API status strip. And we look at I don't see a background. So let's set it manually here, just in case the UI isn't working right. So status strip dot background color equals color dot white, and we'll save that. We'll come back over here, and it still does not look white, which is interesting. Yeah, we'll have to figure out why that is. Note that while we're here, though, it does say status strip 1 as the text, which I don't think the text shows up anywhere, but we're just going to call this status or system status. Okay, we'll save that. Yes, you can modify these things. It's just that when you change something in the designer, it's going to overwrite those settings if if you change them in the designer, that's going to overwrite the settings that were in the code. Therefore, it will overwrite your settings. So just in case, we'll fight around that a little bit more. Maybe I'll restart. I think it might be a bug in the UI. I'm not positive. But that's now our UI. We got something going on. Yes, we're going to change this over time because we do want to have a drop-down for get, post, put, patch, delete. We do want to have things like headers and other things, but for right now, this works. So this is our UI. Next up, what we're going to do is wire up the class library to be able to take in this information. First of all, to validate an API, our URL. And then when we hit the go button, it's going to take that URL, it's going to call it, get the JSON back, and display it in this text box. And by the way, we're going to make that display look right, because when you first do it, it's not going to look right. So my challenge to you is to go ahead and do that before I do. So now we have a UI. Go ahead and build out your class library to be able to support this UI and make the calls necessary. So in our code behind, replace this right here with an actual asynchronous call to the class library to call that API. Add the validation right here, and then put the text from the results into your results window. So make sure it looks right. Make sure it's not just a blob of text, but actually formatted like JSON so it's easy to read. Get all that done before you watch my next video, because I want you to try this as we go and use this as an opportunity to learn as well as practice. Okay? So that's it for now. Thanks for watching. And as always, I am Tim Corey.